Greetings, YouTube. Today I'm going to review the book Driving Mr. Albert, A Trip Across America with Einstein's Brain by Michael Paternity, which I have to say is one of the most unfortunate surnames I have ever encountered in my life. Though it is spelled Paterniti as opposed to the Y at the end like the actual term paternity, it still sounds the same. Just very unfortunate. Now, I've heard about this book years ago. Came out in 2000. And I thought it was an interesting idea. The idea that there was this urban myth that a man had Einstein's brain and it traveled with him from place to place. And an author had written a book about this. Because at first that's all I thought it was, an urban myth. But over time I began to realize that it wasn't an urban myth, that someone actually did have Einstein's brain. And the author, Michael Paternity, wrote an extensive article about it that eventually blossomed that article into a full-blown book, but not a particularly large book. And it is interesting in how he wrote the story and how he presents the character and the person of Thomas Harvey, who is the doctor in question. Now, Thomas Harvey is a real person, and Thomas Harvey was the doctor presiding over the autopsy of Albert Einstein when he died from a heart attack. Apparently, he had a known aneurysm issue, but he had just ignored it as opposed to having surgery done, and eventually killed him. Possibly related to the fact that he pretty much spent the time between 1925 and 1955, 30 years of his life, working on scientific problems that he never solved. So maybe he was just tired. Who knows? As someone once said, Einstein could have gone fishing after 1925 and it wouldn't have made a difference. And he's right, which is kind of sad. But in the process of doing the autopsy, and autopsies are called in many cases when people die. There's an unknown reason, even though it was a really good guess what killed Einstein. You take the organs out, you measure them, things like that, but you don't often take out the brains, unless there's something really related, a known cause, to check that out. And the doctor in question stole it. Another doctor stole the eyes of Einstein, and both of these things still exist outside any final resting place. The eyes and the brain of Dr. Einstein are still out in the world. Now, one of the things I found offensive involved in this wasn't just that he stole the eyes. One doctor did, and Harvey stole the brain. Is that Einstein was Jewish. Now, he wasn't what you'd call a really hardcore Orthodox Jew, but he was Jewish. And it is tradition for Jews to be buried whole, or at least all of their parts present when they're buried. Now, Einstein was cremated, so he was a non-traditionalist. I would have actually probably said he was more of a Buddhist than he was than a Jew by the time later portions of his life. But still, if you didn't know him intimately, stealing part of a Jewish person is really offensive. So that bothered me about Dr. Harvey right off the bat. He's an interesting fellow, at least was. I have no idea if he's still alive. He was 83 when this book was written, so he'd be 96 now, so I have no idea if he's alive. And his reasons were strange. He said he was going to be doing research, and then from 1955 up through the course of this book, on and off, he's given little samples away, he's talked a few times to people, he keeps telling people he's doing research, and it doesn't appear that he ever actually did any research. But then along comes this author, and the author's contacting him on a regular basis. Interestingly, he found him because his landlord knew that Dr. Harvey was the neighbor of William S. Burroughs. So it was a very surreal series of events that led the author to Dr. Harvey. And they actually got to meet William S. Burroughs in the course of their journey. But when he started to talk to Dr. Harvey confided to him that he wanted to visit and meet with the granddaughter of Dr. Einstein, whose first name escapes me. And He's 83 years old. He can't drive. And Mr. Paternity, out of the blue, volunteered to drive him across the country because he was in a point in his life where he didn't know what he wanted. So here you had an old man wanting to visit a person he had no contact with for a meeting that I'm not even sure if he knew what it would mean, with an author who was at a crossroads in his life, confused, not really sure what he wanted in life. So you kind of had two lost men climbing into a rented car and driving across the country with a brain in the trunk. So it's got this very William S. Burroughs road trip feel about it from the get-go. And again, they stop off and visit the man at one point. And he runs into interesting people along the way, and some places that Dr. Harvey used to live, and he begins to learn about Dr. Harvey's life. And what's interesting is that throughout the entire book, and this is one of the things that I found off-putting by the author, he always refers to Dr. Harvey as Harvey. And it's its very clinical style. He spent weeks, a couple of weeks, in a car with this guy, getting across the country. And yet at no point in this entire book does he ever refer to him as Tom or Thomas. Now I'm hoping that in the actual experience that he referred to this man by his first name, didn't continue to refer to him as Dr. Harvey or Harvey, which to my mind is rather cold and impersonal. But I found that distance, that professional distance, somehow inappropriate when you were in such an intimate relationship with this other person. The barriers kind of have to come down when you're this far away from somebody for over a week. But it's an interesting book. It's an interesting tale. Pardon me, tale. My oatmeal is saying hello. It's an interesting tale. And I enjoyed the book and the read and the guy's style. And it was kind of interesting to watch him find himself as he helped Harvey find his way across the nation. And of course, you got some autobiography of the author, and you got a biography of Dr. Harvey, and a little snippets all about Einstein's life thrown in here. So there's enough interest for the science people, and enough interest for the autobiography and the biography folks. There's a wide range of topics that are going to be covered in this book. So they're going to be, I think, be able to draw in a number of different people who will be interested in this story. I was interested in it because there's a story about someone having stolen Einstein's brain and then taking a road trip with it. That right there will pull me in every time. I have a biography of Einstein on my shelf. It's been sitting there for years. I should really get around to reading it. But I enjoyed the book. I had fun. It was, at times, again, some of the characters, and these people, I should say, were not always the most likable, but still, it was an interesting read, a fun read, and I recommend it for those that have an interest in Einstein or in a very strange trip across the United States with a brain in the trunk.